super excited to be here. Today I want to talk about rethinking or maybe reevaluating our Angular architecture and its effects on performance. And we're going to focus mainly on initial load performance over runtime performance. Totally different subject, both super important. Before we get started, a little bit about me. Hopefully you can see the slides. I've been a part of open source for a few years now. I've been with the Angular Universal team since the very beginning. Most recently joined the NestJS core team with Camille, of course. And I've done a lot of cool open source projects over the years, maybe you've seen with .NET, Azure, things like that. I'm also the co-founder of Trilon.io. We're a full stack consulting company focused on everything from design, development, DevOps, and anything in between. So if you're looking for some additional people to come in, kind of review architecture, help you kind of finish things, check out our website, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, so on to the good stuff. Architecture. What does it mean for us Angular developers? What are we architecting and who are we building it for? Well, at a super high level, our apps aren't much more than an app module importing a series of other modules, right? Whether you have a single application or a mono repo, at the end of the day, it all kind of boils down to this. We're going to eventually compile, bundle, deploy our application, hopefully to the cloud somewhere. And there we have it. It's live. Users can actually start using it. But how do users see our application? What do they care about? What's important to them when they first come to our site? Well, unfortunately, they don't care that we used Angular, right? They don't care what we used, how we did it, and they don't know the blood, sweat, and tears we put into our apps and the effort. They found our link on Google, maybe on social media. They clicked on it because they thought it was interesting. They're waiting, and eventually they get to see the app. And hopefully they stick around. They care about three things, but of course many others. But they want our app to be fast, interactive, and responsive, right? So how do we improve the user experience for that initial experience for users with Angular? Well, we know performance matters to them. And Walmart, for example, saw a 1% increase in revenue for every 100 milliseconds improvement in performance. That's huge. So performance isn't something we can overlook. It's not a one and done type thing. It's something we need to constantly work on. Every time we add a new feature, make sure it's something we're checking in on and tuning down to make sure it's faster. Oops. So whether you're starting a new app or you have one in production, how do you get started? Where do we begin? Well, hopefully people have heard of, how many people are already using Lighthouse actually? Nice, quite a few. If you're not using Lighthouse, it's a great tool by the Google Chrome team that helps to audit your website. It yells at you for pretty much everything you've ever done in life and gives you tips on how to fix your site. And I like to think of this whole process with Lighthouse as kind of a three-step process that you're going to repeat for every issue you find. Analyzing the issue, trying out a few things to see if it works, and then auditing it to see if it works. I like to call this the Lighthouse game. It's a terrible game. It's pretty annoying, but it's worth it. And the effort you put into it, you're going to see back in revenue, user retention, things like that. The dream with Lighthouse is 100 across the board. The reality, it's probably a lot worse. Believe it or not, this is actually CNN.com. But burn. So what tools can we use as Angular developers? We've used Lighthouse. Now what? Well, Webpack Bundle Analyzer, if you haven't used it, is an incredible tool that helps you visualize your architecture. You can see what's part of your main bundle, what vendors or third-party libraries, and the size of your lazy chunks. So here's kind of a somewhat realistic application that's making a few mistakes that we can spot right away with Webpack Bundle Analyzer. Right away we can kind of see that we're using all of Material, all of RxJS, and Lodash, and Moment. So these are easy fixes. We can make sure we import only what we need. We can remove things like Moment, maybe switch to something lighter weight. Same thing with RxJS. And make sure we're importing specific things. So with Webpack Bundle, Analyzer, and Lighthouse, now that we've done that, it's important to kind of set some initial goals for our app, right? What's the most important, and then slowly go down the line. It's important to reduce that main thread execution time. The easiest way to do that is by reducing the bundle size. We know that by shipping less JavaScript, we're going to have better performance, but that's kind of easier said than done, right? It's not one of those things that just, I mean, if we could all do it, we wouldn't be talking about it, right? But the key here is really to move as much as you can out of the main bundle into lazy loaded stuff. Try to remove third-party libraries, load them later, defer, anything you can. There's a lot of strategies. So this is important, like we said, because when a user comes to the site, they request all the CSS, JavaScript, and that JavaScript itself is the heaviest burden. So 100 kilobytes of JavaScript, after it's decompressed, parsed, compiled, and then executed, is going to take way more of a hit on performance than a 100 kilobyte image. So it's super essential to take that down as much as we can. So back to some of those metrics and things that the user cares about. When it comes to our app being fast, what does that mean to us? What can we aim to improve? Well, we could improve our first initial paint, what they view when they see our application. Like we said, decrease that bundle size, and then maybe improve time to interactive. So hopefully everyone's already doing this one, but this is the first great thing you can do to improve size is lazy load routes. The one tip I would have with that, though, is to really be careful with the imports. So make sure all the modules are really lean. They import only what they need. And if you try to stay away from certain things like shared modules and stuff like that,
it's going to help you because you're not going to lean on tree shaking and dead code elimination as much. Instead, you're very implicit with what everything needs. So an example would be like an order module where it might be irritating, but you import everything very implicitly. But it's nice because at a glance, we can look at this and say, we know exactly what everything needs. And nothing's going to receive things it doesn't. So for preloading strategies, there's two favorites of mine. One is NGX Quick Link. This is kind of related to lazy loading. It's created by Minko Gevchev, of course. And this actually helps you preload the modules, but when they're visible and the browser's idle. So instead of taking up the main thread time, it's going to wait till everything's idle and then load them as soon as it's visible on the screen. Really nice. And if you need something even better, NestJS is actually a smarter version that's going to use analytics and try to preload things based on what's most likely going to be viewed. Okay, with lazy loading, there's also a way to lazy load things that aren't routable. And there's great tools like NGX Loadable that let you, let's say you have a chat widget at the bottom. It's not absolutely essential to show them this right away, but with something like NGX Loadable, once they get down there, you could view it, and it'll load all the JavaScript, and it'll appear. So a little bit of a delay in the user experience, but this is just going to help decrease that main bundle size, though. And a lot of these things are app-by-app basis, so you need to, kind of determine what you need and what's important for your application. Next up is deferring images. Really similar concept. And NG lazy load images, incredible, super easy, very lightweight, and it's just going to do exactly that. Wait till it's visible, and then load the image. It also has a really nice feature where you can put a default image. You can put like the logo to your website, and then once they see all those little icons, it'll just switch over. So you're going to be delaying those HTTP requests, which is great. So okay, let's put it in kind of like a somewhat real-world example. This is a fake foodies app, and this is the initial page we're going to see. I'm showing mobile because most people view things with mobile these days, right? So these first few components and modules are probably essential, right? We can't delay them. We can't do much here. But what about all the content below the fold, right? And that's going to be different on web, mobile, tablet. But if we scroll down a bit, we can make some decisions here. What do we want to keep? What do we want to remove? What do we want to delay to be rendered? Some things here, like latest from the blog, this is not a big performance hit, just a bunch of text. That's totally fine. But what about this area? Could we maybe lazy load this entire section? Maybe it's important. We can just lazy load the images. These are all decisions you can make, but these tactics will really, really help in the long run, performance-wise. Next, and this is huge. So how many people are already deploying everything to CDN? Just a few. Awesome. So this is super important. This is like an instant big win. Using something like Cloudflare, there's a lot of other great tools. You're going to deliver everything on the edge. So if you're in Tokyo, Poland, or New York, you're going to get something the closest to you. It's going to be cached on a server, and it's going to be much faster than any server you could randomly spin up. And to go along with that, make sure those files are compressed. So at a minimum, use gzip. It's going to at least half your payload size. And if you can, use Brotli. And Cloudflare, for example, just has a toggle, so there's no reason not to use Brotli. Super awesome. Okay, so to improve that initial experience when they first view our application, the best tool to use is server-side rendering, also known as Angular Universal. It comes with a slight con of maybe making a slower time to interactive, that initial, like that overall client-side bootstrap, but I think it's definitely worth it, and there's a few things you can do to kind of still keep your app slightly interactive and functioning that we'll discuss in a second. So, compared to traditional rendering, where someone comes to the application, we see a loading screen, I think I spelled it wrong, oops. And if they're on a slower device, 3G or something like that, they might be here for a while. That's not good. I mean, I'm sure we've all been there. It takes forever to load a certain website. You just back out and try something else. So that's something we don't want. With server-side rendering, they're going to see the application right away. But if they're on a slow device, it might take a while to bootstrap, but they at least have something they can see and maybe interact with. So this kind of ties into that. It's really important to make sure they can still do something in your app. Not everything's going to be functioning. You're not going to have a carousel, all kinds of cool JavaScript stuff. All that stuff hasn't loaded yet. All they're going to really see is HTML and CSS. So you want to make sure that experience is still a little bit interactive. Add a few things in there, even if you need to, vanilla JavaScript, just to make some kind of functionality that's really important for your application. Because when they first see that paint, this thing here, like they need to actually still be able to do something. Because there's actually a period of time, it's like a gap. And it could be a few seconds, and it could be 10, 15 if they're on a really slow internet connection, where it's not our regular Angular app yet. So, little tips and tricks for this. Try to use router link instead of click events. Because a router link is actually going to turn into just an anchor tag with an href during a server-side render. So it's still functioning. If they click on it, it's going to take them to the next page. Things like a hamburger menu, maybe a login modal. Since you can't open modals yet, just navigate to a page that loads that component. And they won't even realize that in the background of that page, it's still going to, eventually it's going to bootstrap, and they'll have your full app experience eventually. So like little kind of hacky tricks, but it works really well. And like we said, make sure they can scroll. They should still see something. They might not see everything, but something. Okay, so with server-side rendering, there's two main types of SSR. One is called dynamic, and this is going to be at runtime. And this is really essential for pages like a products list, where it's going to change at any moment. So when the user hits products, they're going to request the application, we're going to serialize it, hit all the APIs, and it's going to come back round trip. It takes a little bit longer. Pre-rendering, when they hit that products page, if we already had it pre-rendered, this was done at build time. So they're just going to get an index or HTML file. It's going to be that much faster. So if you can opt for pre-rendering over dynamic, because you can cache that, you could use memcache, Redis, or just store the files themselves and return them back to the user. But a cool thing is a lot of applications actually need all three. So in this example, we could see we have some routes that are being pre-rendered, a few are dynamic, and then anything else is just we're going to return that regular HTML file for our typical Angular experience. So it's kind of nice. It lets you get to leverage everything and get the best of all three worlds. And lastly, with server-side rendering, make sure you're caching those HTTP responses. And the Angular Universal repo actually has a package for this right away. And this is just literally, you just add it in, and it's going to cache all of your GET requests and then reuse them. So you're not going to get flicker, and you're going to save that many requests. And just a general tip, it's not even related, but keep the API calls lean, they'll be faster, and then you're going to have less in the HTML. So lastly, we talked about being responsive. We can't really dive into mobile and tablet, but hopefully we're all doing that, super important. But something we have control over is making sure our app is usable even with slow or no internet. Of course, the tool for this is PWAs, progressive web apps. Even if you don't care about PWAs, you don't care about your app being installable, things like that, if you set up a service worker, it's super beneficial. You can cache all these assets. And when your user hopefully comes back to your site, it's going to be that much faster. So I know I just threw like way too many things at you in like 10 minutes, but it's really all about finding the right balance and figuring out what makes sense for your application. determining what's important on that first viewing or that first experience, what could be moved over, lazy loaded. Do you need server-side rendering? Is this a public-facing application? Is it internal? So there really is no one-stop solution, but I would say if you could do all the lazy loading, CDN, things like that, you're going to see a huge improvement, and it's super easy to do. So remember what matters, make your app fast, make it responsive, interactive. It's all about the user experience. Don't get caught up in GraphQL or just some other, random hype thing. I'm not saying it's bad, it's amazing. But it's the user experience that matters. What we use is fun for us, but what someone experiences is what the end goal. So if we focus on that, focus on experience, your app will always be more successful. So in conclusion, keep that main bundle small, move anything you can out of app module, lazy load it. Try to keep your modules very lean, be intentional with the imports. Lazy load just anything possible, images, modules, components. And if you're doing server-side rendering, just remember to be functional. Some additional resources. Minko GevChev has a great GitHub repo, Angular performance checklist, which has some of these things and many more. Definitely check that out. And David East has a whole series on Universal and some of the trickiness with measuring it with Lighthouse and things like that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Dziękuję bardzo.